You wanted me to link my, to connect the front page of Walu's presentation as a background. But you know, two people can't share the screen, eh?
Yes, that is when the moderator has the floor, then you can do that. I see someone has raised their hand. Kivuva.
Also, why is Ali twice? Or it doesn't matter. He was logged in twice.
He has two devices.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. He's the moderator.
Yeah, I want to make sure I have redundancy.
I've added Kivuva there.
Sasa
There is a Q&A.
Purposes.
mnaninyima voice ndio nini ifanyike?
Ndio usi zoom.
Lazima upewe permission.
Hakuna Zoom bombing
He wants to
actually.
bomb us.
So,
you're a hacker.
Listen, guys. Listen, well, Nani Barak,
Yes.
you need to mute volume for everybody. Anyone who wants to ask a question, they put it on the Q&A.
Okay.
Yes.
The volume is automatically muted. I can only unmute when someone raises their hand. So as the moderator, I think you need to share that instruction when we start.
Yeah.
You know.
Where are the other moderators? Where are the other panelists?
They've sent messages there in meetings. The Huawei team was in a meeting that was to end at 2:30. Yeah.
And where are participants? Where are the participants?
Participants are still loading.
How many are online already?
He'll allow them. He'll allow them last minute, I think.
We have two participants. I see Mohammed and Patricia.
They will drop out. People will just go away.
But it's not yet time, Ama.
It's not yet time.
Oh, my clock is ahead. Oh, we have 10 minutes. Okay.
You're using New York time.
My clock is 10 minutes ahead, so I'm wondering. Okay. Hour.
Is that background real or Kivuva, is your background real or I can borrow it? It looks like for a professor.
What do you mean? But that is my study. Unless you want to come and carry my study to your place.
It's real work, eh? Wow.
Yes.
You read a lot, man. I should be a prof.
Actually, I'll be a prof very soon.
I was thinking it's one of those back screens you can share. I don't hear it. It probably is.
I can send you my carpenter.
So Barak, can we just quickly confirm the confirmed
attendees?
The confirmed panelists. Walubengo?
Yes.
Walu?
Yes, I'm there.
Lecturer at MMC.
Multimedia University. Yeah.
Multimedia University. Senior lecturer or just
lecturer? Hey, senior, where's the goose unless you're a PhD?
Yeah. The next one is Dr. Bello.
From Huawei.
Dr. Bello from Huawei. What's Dr. Bello's autobiography? I'll get that. The third one is Obama.
Yes.
Yes, Engineer Obama.
Engineer Obama is secretary
NCS.
National.
Although he's
Hmm?
He's speaking
He's
in
not
his
wearing-
personal capacity,
Sorry.
but you can read his title, but
okay.
emphasize he's there in his personal capacity.
No. He can't be here in his personal capacity. He's secretary what?
NCS, National Communication Secretariat. Communication Secretariat, Spectrum Expert.
Secretariat.
Add that one. Yeah. Add Spectrum Expert. I think that's what you wanted to emphasize.
Spectrum expert.
Spectrum Expert. Yeah.
Okay, so let's leave it as spectrum expert. Number 4 is what's her name? Barak, I hope you've muted everybody except us. Eh?
Sorry?
I hope you've muted
Pardon?
everybody except us. Eh?
Can the others hear us?
Participants are joining.
Yeah,
So
but
they
mute
can
them,
hear
please.
us.
They are muted.
They are muted. The last one is Miss Kinyanjui. What's her name again?
From CA.
What's her first name?
Anne.
Anne Kinyanjui.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Where are our panelists?
Let me just check with them because we have a few minutes to go.
downloads and 12 megabit per second for uploads. So how does 4G get this fast? First of all, 4G
哦，那个连接有问题，但是有另外一个连接可以用。你们需要注册，连接我转给你。他们应该没有可能我们的问题是华为也自己用这种，所以有一个矛盾。我看看吧。还有木子也还没上线，我要帮木子。
Barak, where are our panelists?
This is Adam. Can anybody hear me?
Adam, I can hear you.
Yeah, Walu is also in the house.
So, Ali, you are the host of the meeting.
Are we ready to begin?
Just waiting for Anne and Engineer Obam to join, but I think as soon as Anne joins, we can start.
Have you spoken to them?
Yes.
Okay, Barak, can you give me an opportunity to speak to our guests and just ask them to give us a few minutes?
Okay.
You can tell me to go when I'm ready.
Go ahead. I can hear you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this webinar on 5G, hosted by Kitanet and sponsored by Huawei. Kindly please give us a few minutes as we wait for one or two of our panelists to join us. As we do that, If you look at your screen, you will see a Q&A point where you could post your questions as the conversations with the panelists unfold. Thank you very much, and please give us a few minutes as we do the final few minutes of our preparations. Thank you. Good afternoon. I think we shall kick off now. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And without further ado, I would like to introduce my panelists. But before we do that, just a quick intro. Today we are really going to be talking about 5G, what it is and what it is not. We have a distinguished panel made up of John Olubengo, who is a lecturer at Multimedia University, Dr. Bello of Hawaii. We also have Adam Lane from Hawaii. We have Anne Kinyanjui, who is the acting manager, frequency planning at the Communications Authority, and Dr. Daniel Obam, who is a spectrum expert. So without further ado, I would like to ask John Olubengo to kick off with presentation. and a few
Okay,
words. John,
thank-
over to you.
Asante Ali, thank you all participants for making the time. I'll kick off with a brief overview of 1G all the way to 5G. Allow me to share my screen in a moment. Okay, I hope everybody can see that. We're going to talk about the progression, the historical progression from 1G to 4G. So I'll make use of the video proceedings to just get us on the same page as to these technologies. And then after that, I will then discuss the characteristics that are specific to 5G, a few use cases, and then we'll end up with the rollout predictions. I'm sure the moderator will share with us the slides, but the video I'm going to play is on YouTube. So I'll just click on it and
It all began with one.
let it roll. Just a minute, I share them.
G. Bulky analog mobile phones that only allowed voice calls. Then came 2G.
I hope everybody can see this, the YouTube video.
Digital mobile communication that combined calling and texting. And then came 3G. Finally, the internet went mobile with a simple mobile device.
Allow me, I'll just start it again.
Began with 1G. Bulky analog mobile phones that only allowed voice calls. Then came 2G. Digital mobile communication that combined calling and texting. And then came 3G. Finally, the internet went mobile. With a simple mobile device, you could send mails, read the newspaper, check your favorite social media, basic videos, and so on. But now there's 4G, extremely fast mobile internet. How fast? You can surf at the speed of your fixed line at home while you're on the move. 4G at base offers speeds of up to 86 megabit per second for downloads and 28.8 megabits per second for uploads. The 4G network also offers faster network reaction times due to lower latency and much more stable connections, even in low coverage areas. Note that we said up to 86 megabits per second. That's the theoretical maximum speed. Actual speed is influenced by many factors. Your distance from the antenna, whether you're in a building or outside, the number of users in your area, the network resources available, your type of device, and the application you're using. Under normal conditions, you will still reach average speeds of around 20 megabit per second for downloads and 12 megabit per second for uploads. So how does 4G get this fast? First of all, 4G has a different frequency management. You share the available bandwidth with other users. The way the frequency is shared is different in 4G compared to 3G. In 3G, it's like your speed is regulated and limited. 4G uses much more efficient radio coding. This means that you will receive bandwidth that's dedicated to you. Think of a racetrack reserved just for your race car. You can go as fast as you want, and if other tracks are available, you can use them for more throughput. Also, 4G uses all IP technology. This is the common language of data systems. A 3G network uses different languages to transport data over the network to the customer. A 4G network uses only one single language to transport data, all IP. And finally, 4G's network architecture is smarter and flatter. When you connect, you're no longer transferred to a controller that regulates the traffic flow. Because of 4G's smart network architecture, antennas will immediately find the best way for you to connect. Getting started with 4G is really easy. You only need 3 things: a base subscription that includes 4G, a mobile device that supports 4G, and a 4G coverage area that you need to be in. With 4G, Base offers you extremely fast mobile internet. It's just as fast as your fixed internet at home, even while you're on the go.
Okay, so
It all
basically,
began with one.
so basically that's the quick intro. What I want you to remember in that intro are the following key things that I'll move into the 5G with. I'm looking for one that captures, yeah, here, maybe next, yeah. So for the 4G, the improvement from 3G to 4G is the all IP, they call it the internet protocol. So in the previous generations, you will find that different sections of the network were using different technologies. And that introduces some delays in the communication. So with 4G, as is with 5G, they standardized on internet technologies, or sorry, on internet protocol, so that there's no switching between what they call the radio side, the backhaul side, and the core. So everything is on one platform, and that improves on the speeds. The other thing you need to remember is that you are the user, you'll often be here, and you'll be connecting to the nearest base station here. And that base station will take your traffic and backhaul it to the switching center. That's the headquarters of the telco. So in terms of generational progression, there's always improvements between you and the base station, between the base station and the core network, and of course, as I said, the platform. So each generation makes things a lot more efficient, a lot more faster, and in the process, they introduce new services to the community. So I want to just switch back to my slides. That will take a moment.
John.
Yes.
Okay, you have a few minutes before we can we move to the other panelists.
No, I'm not finished. I now want to finish. I'm now switching to my slides now. I have 5 more minutes, I hope. So we've already done the historical development to set the stage. I want now to talk about 5G itself. This slide is borrowed from ITU Academy, and the first column shows the characteristics, the key differences between 4G technology, which is in the center here, and 5G technology, IMT 2020, which is at the end. And the differences will be, in general, the broadband speed. So as a user, you will experience better download and upload speeds. For the non-techies, these speeds may not mean much, but maybe you think in terms of you're downloading a 2-hour movie. If you're on 4G, you probably might take, let's say, 20 minutes to download a 2-hour movie on your phone. With 5G, it may take you 2 minutes, 3 minutes. So those are the differences in the user experience that enhanced broadband brings to you. For the engineers, there's better spectrum efficiency. So from an engineering perspective, frequency is a scarce resource. So the regulator will tend to give you the lowest, or they will reserve its allocation so that they don't waste it. So if you get machines or equipment that can pump more information in the limited spectrum, the better for you. So you have at 5G better spectrum efficiency. Mobility, so you're able to receive internet communication while moving. Imagine if you're in a speed train that's 500 kilometers per hour, your internet connectivity will not drop. So that's a huge improvement from a user experience. Most of us who travel to Western will know that as you travel, there'll be gaps. You're on the internet for maybe 2 hours, then suddenly for 10 minutes, there's no internet, then you come back, you drop. With this new technology, it's taking care of the speeds. It's able to provide connectivity despite the motions you're going through. Then there's latency. This one speaks to the turnaround time between sending a message and getting a feedback. So with 5G, that improves 10 times from 4G. What this translates to is that we are able to do you're able to do time-sensitive operations. For example, remote surgery. You'll have a doctor in India carrying out a heart surgery in Kenyatta National Hospital, because whatever they're doing remotely has been communicated and translated into a robot that is, 5,000 miles away. There's also the advantage of the amount of devices that can connect to a particular, radius. So with 5G, you get to support more devices than before. What this translates to is in terms of smart meters. So if you're thinking about Nairobi Water Company, instead of sending individuals to come to your house to read the meter, you would have each house having a meter, more or less like what Kenya Power tried, and I don't know why they stopped. But that's the direction where you have millions of smart meters able to report back to a central database on their own. And they're going to use the 5G network, or 5G is more designed for that kind of service as opposed to the traditional 4G. So these are some of the characteristic differences. Just because of time, I want to move to the next. One of our panelists will go deeper into the use cases, but I'd already mentioned enhanced mobile broadband. The user enjoys more internet speeds. Massive machine type. This is about Internet of Things. You have very many devices that are able to exchange information between themselves. And then ultra reliable, low latency. This is where a signal is sent from one end of the world and it's instantly acted upon with minimal time lapse. I want to conclude by just painting the picture that whereas we're talking a lot about 5G, the rollout is not, going to eliminate the other older technologies. So if you look at the 5G projection, we're now at 2020. Very few countries have actually done commercial deployment, but increasingly within 5 years, this researcher predicted that 14% of mobile connections will be on 5G. If you compare with 3G, you'll see that it will still be there 5 years from now. You'll also notice that 4G, which was launched at least in Kenya about 4 years ago, by 2025, you'll realize that it will be the majority or the leading technology. So most people think that 5G is coming to kill 2G, 3G, 4G. No, they're going to exist side by side, even though it will continue taking over the share. I think that brings me to the end. Moderator.
Thank you, Walu.
Give you back
much appreciated. Walu, thank you very much.
Asante.
Our next panelist, please prepare your questions on the Q&A. Participants, as I told you, the Q&A is, if you look on your screen, on the bottom part, there's a Q&A part. Please prepare your questions. We'll come back to you shortly on that. Our next panelist is Adam Lane. Adam is the Deputy CEO at Huawei East Africa. Adam?
Yes.
Adam, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Let me just see how I can upload the presentation. Give me a split second. Meanwhile, I'll try and talk whilst I speak. So thank you all very much for having us on this call. I think many of you will know about Huawei. Maybe we've become synonymous with 5G at the moment, for good or for bad reasons. I would think hopefully good. It's a good thing. So I'm still struggling to find the document on my phone. So I'll talk anyway at the moment. So Huawei has become a global leader in 5G. We invested in it a long time ago, I think before many others did, and we have now more patents than most others as well. I think, I don't know, Ali, maybe you can share the PowerPoint since I'm struggling to share it. I just sent on WhatsApp. Are you able to do that?
Adam, give me a sec.
All right, then, thanks, Ali. Okay. I apologize, people.
7. Okay, nitakutumia. Sio utakuja.
Adam,
Yeah.
are you able to
Ali?
share the PowerPoint? Are you able to share?
I think so. Hold on, I can share my screen so everyone can see my screen
please
whilst
go
I
ahead.
try and open. Okay. Okay, is this working? Can people see the PowerPoint? Can you see the screen?
Yes, I can see.
Okay, great. Sorry. So yeah, so Huawei started a long time ago researching 5G. As you can see now, we've about 91 contracts around the world, about 700,000 base stations basically shipped. So we're very closely working with various governments and mobile operators around the world, especially including in Kenya as well. 5G has become very important, and people often wonder why. Well, now most countries, not yet Kenya or many African countries, have developed actually 5G strategies, 5G policies, and so on. They're very interesting. They include estimates of economic growth based on 5G. They also include estimates of jobs created from 5G and so on. So it's really being seen. I think it's the first time actually, way more than 4G or 3G or anything else, that 5G is becoming a cornerstone for a national strategy, which is really exciting to see. And people are really seeing it as a part of the digital economy. As I'm sure Mr. Obama mentioned, Kenya has a digital economy strategy, well, a blueprint at the moment, and the strategy is coming. And 5G is a core part of that, as well as 5 and other forms of connectivity. Here are some of the statistics that some of the other countries have proposed in terms of the contribution of 5G to their economies. The numbers are quite staggering, actually. Australia is very interesting. Australia has actually worked out the difference whether they have slow rollout or fast rollout, which is quite interesting, as well as how big the rollout is. So it's also quite interesting to see that. In terms of now use cases, so as Walu mentioned, the 3 main aspects of 5G around basically faster internet, more connections to the internet, and faster response time for the internet. So you can see there some of the different use cases. Some are not relevant for Kenya. To be honest, I don't think we'll have too many self-driving vehicles. It's not the biggest priority right now. Other things are more important, and I'll talk a bit about those in the following slides. So one of them is health. So where there is 5G already in China and in Europe, they've been using 5G a lot in health, for remote consultations, for both in conference rooms as well as on ambulances, for remote diagnosis. They've got mobile trolleys that can move around in hospitals. They've got unmanned vehicles that are doing delivery of medical items as well as even e-commerce. They're using it for as backhaul as they do thermometer and heat detection. They even have small robots that are moving things around hospitals, delivering items.
Nice.
So it's very interesting. As I think you can tell with COVID at the moment, the key issue is you don't want human contact. So having robots that can do some of this work, having more video conference is very important. A 5G can be put up very, very quickly, very, very high speed compared to fiber. I think some other people are still speaking in the background. I'll continue. Now, when it comes to Kenya, the biggest use of 5G will be what we call fixed wireless access, which is when you basically put a SIM card in a small modem or a router, and then from that you get Wi-Fi. This is what you often get at the moment at homes. So you may not need to get fiber to your home in the future. You'll just be putting in a 5G box. So you won't need to be digging trenches or threading cables, because you'll actually get fiber-like speeds just from a 5G connection. And that has a lot of really interesting uses, not just in homes, of course, also for small businesses, but also for bigger businesses. If we think about a hotel, instead of having to put fiber all across a hotel and a Wi-Fi box in every room or every corridor, you just give people one of these 5G modems, or we call it a CPE, and with a SIM card, and then they have their very high-speed internet in their room. So there's a lot of really interesting uses of 5G and fixed wireless access. Of course, it's not just for the internet directly, it'll be used for security. So you can access remotely your security cameras, home entertainment, streaming, and so on. Although we don't talk too much about this here, what's very interesting from a fixed wireless access perspective is the experiences of Korea and in Europe, where generally many people are now getting 5G data plans, which are unlimited, and they're now paying on speed. So if you want, say, 10 megabits per second, you pay, say, $30 a month. If you want 50 megabits per second, maybe you pay $50 a month. If you want 100 megabits per second, maybe $100 a month. So it's very interesting. It's basically like the same pricing that you get with home fiber at the moment. The second aspect is where you do have data bundles, you are getting now 10 times what you would get before from the 4G to 5G. So, and the reason for this is often because 5G is actually more economical for operators. They can actually provide much more data much more cheaply, with less energy and so on, than they could using 4G. I want to move on a little bit to another aspect, I'm hesitant of time, which is also around tourism. I think this is going to be a huge opportunity in the next, something we should look at for the next 3 to 6 months whilst we try to resurrect the tourism industry post-COVID. How do we brand Kenya? How do we get people interested in Kenya? Are there even forms of revenue where you could be doing live streaming? Are there various other forms of AR and VR that we can utilize and to keep the brand of Kenya up there for when tourists are willing to come back, for example? So we've already been live streaming from the top of Mount Everest. Well, not quite the top, but near the top. And we think that there can be lots of potential to do some of this in Kenya as well. The key difference, I suppose, of 5G to 4G is that from the operator's perspective, they're not really looking so much at the consumer market. They're looking more at the enterprise market. That means they're looking at things relevant to Kenya, things like ports. So actually in Ningbo, which is near Shanghai in China, we've already got partnerships where we are using 5G technologies in the port. They're driving vehicles around ports, which can be quite dangerous, which are, as you can see, collecting containers, moving containers around. They're also having other security systems as well, CCTV systems, and so on. So it's quite interesting to see the use cases of this. Another aspect, of course, in Kenya could be around factories. Now, as Kenya is starting to expand its manufacturing, there's also an opportunity to leapfrog. Now, it doesn't mean all factories should be automated, of course, but certain products, especially those which are dangerous, such as chemical factories, some of the like leather processing factories and so on, can be very useful. And certainly things like automobile manufacture and stuff, which are already often quite technical and using some automation, will start to use 5G. They'll be using this not so much because of the speeds, partly because of the numbers of connections. And the second main reason is because of the latency. this issue that it's very quick when you send the signal from one machine through the internet to back to another machine afterwards, which allows for robotics and other things. So as I look to wrap up, and just summarizing in terms of the road to 5G in the future, these are the kind of ideas that we'll be looking at discussing with stakeholders in Kenya, the operator partners, also with the government. As Wally mentioned around the use of spectrum, currently there is, and I'm sure Mr. Obama and also Anne will talk about spectrum, so I won't talk much about that now, but of course 5G does need different forms of spectrum and different amounts of spectrum compared to 4G or other technologies. There are going to be an important aspect of engaging in standardization processes, which the Kenyan government has been very engaged in, which is really to their strength. And then of course, looking at test cases and doing trials where the government can encourage private sector, through tax benefits, for example, through R&D. They could look at bringing private and public sector together to look at certain use cases. Right now, for example, the security cameras in Nairobi and Mombasa that you see on the street, they all use fiber, but they certainly could be using 5G as well. And maybe, if we need to have checkpoints now because of the COVID issue, obviously running fiber to some of these areas on the edges of towns would be quite tricky. And if you need to move checkpoints, it would take a lot of time, but you could use 5G or potentially even 4G in the short term to try to connect these security cameras, license plate recognition cameras and so on, and setting up these kind of virtual checkpoints. So I think that's some of the key topics I wanted to mention. I think I'll leave it there and we'll take questions later, I suppose. I'm sure some of which may be difficult, some of which may be easy, but we're happy to answer any of those questions. Thank you.
Adam, thank you so much. I appreciate that presentation, brilliant. We'll definitely be taking some questions later, but let me now introduce Engineer Obam. Engineer Obam is a spectrum specialist, and Engineer Obam is going to briefly talk about 5G realities and myths. Now, I know quite a number of you have some conversations around what is 5G, what are the realities, what are the myths. I'm not gonna start even talking about issues to do with COVID-19 and stuff like that. But let me ask Engineer to take over from here. Engineer, over to you.
Okay.
Engineer, are you with us?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Engineer Obam. Please go
You
ahead.
don't need my video, okay? Because I'm sharing my screen. Okay, thank you, Ali and colleagues. Glad to be here. One thing, you will see the difference between an academic presentation as done by Walu with diversity of video and very nice graphs, and the one from corporate as done by Adam, and the one done by a simple government employee like me. So going to my introductory slide. I think this part has been covered by most of the speakers who are there before. But approaching my presentation from a radio electromagnetic spectrum perspective. So cellular technologies, including 5G, rely on radio communication on spectrum to deliver their services. And these surround us all the time, from the TV to the radio signal, to microwaves at home, to sunlight, to mobile phones, from electricity. They're all around us. 5G uses slightly higher frequencies than the earlier mobile networks, which Walu eloquently elaborated, 2G, 3G, 4G. And because they are higher frequencies, they are inversely related to the distance they travel. So 5G waves will travel a shorter distance than the previous networks. Now, to put it in context, this is the electromagnetic spectrum, starting from direct current on the left to the highest frequencies possible. And it is divided into two sections, what we call non-ionizing and ionizing. And non-ionizing ranges from the electricity in the house to radio frequencies, TVs and your computer monitor, mobile frequencies, medium wave in radio, FM, TV, your cellular phones, microwave links, and satellites. Then from there, we go to infrared. And then we have the visible sunlight, with the visible light, which is a sunlight. Then after that, you go to ultraviolet, then you go to X-rays, then you go to gamma rays. So you can see that
Engineer, you're breaking up a bit.
Am I?
Sure what is...
I'm sorry. Is this better? Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear. We can hear. Please.
I'm sorry about that. I'm saying that if you look at the screen where my cursor is, that's where the mobile phones are. But I'll come to this later. Let me just continue the presentation. But this shows you. But the important thing is to realize what we call non-ionizing and ionizing radio waves. So Adam talked about frequencies, and I'll spend some time talking about which frequencies are used for 5G. 1G to 4G used frequencies, which we call the sub 6 gigahertz. That's about from 1 to 5 gigahertz frequency bands. And initially, 5G was meant to use frequencies above 24 gigahertz up to 90 gigahertz. But due to standards development, as Adam has mentioned, there's one group called the 3GPP, which develops the standards for 5G. And in their release 15 of 2018, they introduced two different frequency ranges. The one from 450 to 6 gigahertz. Am I being heard? Like somebody's...
Yeah, we can hear, but somebody is screaming. I don't know if he's behind you or somebody else.
Where I am, I'm locked in.
Okay.
Yeah, so the first band is a sub 6 gigahertz band. The second band released by 3GPP was from 20 to 24 gigahertz up to around 50 something gigahertz. So during the World Radio Conference, which was held in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, the world discussed the issue of frequencies for 5G and agreed on the following harmonized for 5G deployment across the globe. And you will see that this goes from 24 gigahertz upwards, because the sub 6 gigahertz frequency bands had already been identified for mobile broadband. And I'll list you some of the sub 6 gigahertz. So in the last radio conference, somebody asked, I think I saw on the chat, somebody asking, which are the frequency bands? So globally, these are the bands that have been agreed by everyone. So 24.25 to 27.5 gigahertz, that's the first band, or parts of it. 37 to 43.5 gigahertz, and 66 to 71 gigahertz. So these are the bands that have been agreed globally for harmonize, so that if devices now, people like Huawei and others will make devices in these bands, so that if you go around the world, it can be able to roam. Also on a regional basis, because some regions already use some frequencies for something else, the two frequency bands, 45.5 to 47 gigahertz and 47.2 to 48.2 gigahertz were agreed to be regionally harmonized. So you may find they are harmonized in what we call region 1 or region 2 or region 3. Kenya, Africa, Europe, the Arab countries, and the former Soviet Union, we are in what we call region 1. The US, Canada, Mexico, and the Americas, South America, are in region 2. The whole of Asia and Australasia are in region 3. So let me talk a little bit about the sub 6 gigahertz frequency bands. These are the bands that you know that are already used for maybe 3G or 4G or 2G. And the idea is that since these bands are already located to mobile, in future they can be refarmed to be used by 5G. So I'm talking about 700 megahertz, which was vacated by broadcasting services during the digital migration. Now you understand why digital migration was very important. 800 megahertz, which is being used for 4G, but in future, maybe it could be refarmed for 5G. Again, you realize this came from digital broadcasting. 1800 megahertz, 2100, 2300, 2500. Then there's a 3500, which is the one used for WiMAX. So this band has been identified as a potential band that can be used for 5G. Then we go on to higher bands like 4.8 gigahertz up to 4.9 gigahertz. So those are some of the lower bands. So it is not true that 5G will only be deployed in higher frequency bands. Now, talking about some recent information, there's an organization called the Global Mobile Suppliers Association, GSA, of which I think Huawei is a member. In their report dated last month, of all the announced devices that are available now or that have been announced, 70% will support sub-6 gigahertz spectrum bands. So you can see the majority of the devices that have been announced by manufacturers are actually the sub-6 gigahertz band, which means they are not using the higher band. So only 29.3 support the millimeter wave at the 24 gigahertz going up, and only 22.6% support both bands. So the 5G ecosystem is expected to grow on a monthly basis, and there's even prediction that we are going to see another 35 new devices announced by the end of June this year. So let's talk about, we are not doctors, but I think we can talk about our sector in relation to health. So all mobile phones use electromagnetic radiation, and this has led to people worrying about health issues. The WHO and other, like the Center for Non-Ionizing Radiation, there's been inconclusive evidence that mobile phones do cause harm, and there's a lot of research on this. I've just given you one reference. However, the WHO and the Agency for Research on Cancer do classify this frequency radiation as possible carcinogenic. Just like the way we are told, and I apologize for this if I use the wrong article, drinking alcohol, eating processed meat, eating roasted meat can cause you cancer. That has been actually verified, but the radiomagnetic effects based on research has not been confirmed to cause cancer or affect the body. So let me go to the myths. Walu already covered this, and Adam as well. 5G is not about just faster speeds. Although it's about 100 times faster than 4G, but it has an impact on, it's expected to have an impact on other industries. I think Adam and Walu talked about this. IoT, self-driving cars, robotics, manufacturing. You can imagine a factory. Today, a robot in a factory is wired with cables. With 5G, you don't need the cables, because when you have cables and they move around, they can cut, which means that occasionally you have to keep on checking that the cables are working. But with 5G, which is wireless, it means the robots can move more flexibly around, and therefore this can improve manufacturing. 5G is about bandwidth. It's not just bandwidth, not just it's faster. I think Walu already talked about latency, and this is illustrated like if you have yourself, if you play PlayStation, or you have somebody who plays PlayStation and they are playing over the internet, the latency makes them very difficult to play as a team, because the information travels at a very slow speed if you're using 4G. But with 5G, because of the low latency, it will almost be real time, because it's traveling almost at the speed of light. I think we've talked about helping doctors support remote surgery. Adam talked about that. So 5G will not only impact the telecom industry, as some people think, it's going to change everybody's life. Entertainment, farming. You can imagine a farmer who has automated harvesting, plowing equipment. It can be used for maintenance to check which equipment is working. So again, another myth, once deployed, 5G will completely replace 4G. I think Walu has already talked about this, so I don't need to emphasize it. Important point here, because 5G is not going to replace 4G entirely, The deployment of 5G is done on two modes, one called non-standalone system and standalone. But because standalone will take a long time, most people are opting for the non-standalone, so, which is sort of a hybrid between 4G and 5G. I've seen a chart asking whether the two will coexist, and yes, the answer is they will, and they are geared to do that. Just the way when you go to an area where there's 3G and there's no 4G, your device will go to 3G. That is if the device can support both. And the other myth is that 5G is coming very soon. Adam will tell you that, but I'll tell you, you probably have to wait a bit longer for 5G to come because it has to be deployed and it's quite expensive. So the big myth, 5G is dangerous. We've said how it will improve our lives. We've talked about the concerns. But you see, the concerns came up, if you saw what was trending on YouTube, this guy was supposed to have been working for Vodafone. He said that 5G will use frequencies in the 50 gig. As you've seen from my previous slide, that most of the devices actually are using sub-6 gigahertz band. And so the other cellular services are also using the same frequency band. So there's a belief that this poses a undue health risk other than the others. And cancer, Alzheimer's disease, and they think that the chance of getting 5G is higher than for the other previous generations. And there's confusion between ionizing and non-ionizing radiation, which I've explained. So, as I said, all light is radiation, and it's just energy moving through space. The difference is whether it's ionizing or non-ionizing. So, theory number one, I'm about to finish out, bear with me, that 5G can suppress the immune system and therefore make people susceptible to catching coronavirus. Theory number two, coronavirus can be transmitted using 5G. So it's true that radio waves can disrupt our bodies by heating up our body cells and causing our immune system not to work properly. However, the energy levels from 5G radio waves are very tiny, and they're nowhere near strong enough to affect our system. And as I'll show you again, the mobile technology sits right at the lower end of the electromagnetic spectrum. So they're even less powerful than visible light. Like you sit in the sun, if you are allowed after the lockdown, you'll go to Mombasa and be on the beach, bathing in the sun. But this technology not anywhere near there. So where does 5G sit in this? This is very like an expansion of what I showed you yesterday. So you have the radio, just FM and medium wave. Then you have 5G sitting right there. They're even above microwaves. Do you know that your microwave at home radiates about 1.2 kilowatts? But what actually gets out is about 700 watts. That's what you get. Wi-Fi is normally very strong. Then you go up and then you have the visible light. Then you have ultraviolet light, which we are exposed to. Then you have X-rays and gamma rays. So you see where 5G sits. 5G sits on the really very low end of the non-ionizing radiation. So it is, until otherwise proven, given the current studies, it's not true that it causes this problem. So conclusion, this is my last slide. So many people who oppose the use of radio frequency wave, they cherry pick studies that support the argument, but they often ignore the quality of the other things that are inconsistencies that have been performed before. For those who are proponents of 5G, I think like Walu, because he's the one who writes articles about them, he believes that the benefits of 5G can provide society outweigh the unknowns, as it will have a transformational impact on our lives and enable fundamental changes. We can learn from history. When mobile phones came, people were worried. People were saying, why should you carry a phone around? Why should your phone show the number of the person calling you? Why, people ask so many questions and they didn't see the benefit. 20 years later, we cannot second guess the benefits of wireless technology. Therefore, in conclusion, what I would like to say is that I think we need to study and have conclusive proof on the potential health effects of mobile networks in general and 5G in particular before we jump to any conclusion that it's actually harmful. And yeah, with that, maybe, sorry, moderator, I've taken a bit long, but I thought I go through this. Thank you. for your attention. Is anyone there?
Yes, we are. We had. Thank you a lot, Engineer Obam. I don't know where our moderator has disappeared to. Ali Hussein, are you there? I've seen he has switched off his.
So Ali, why don't you continue?
Yes.
In the interest of time.
No, we have a backup. Barak will continue. Barak?
Yes, I believe next in line is Anne from CA. Anne, you can take the floor as we get Ali back again.
Okay, thank you. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you and see you.
Yes, loud and clear.
Let me share my screen so that I can do the presentation. I hope you can all see my screen. Is it sharing?
Not yet. We can only see your lovely face.
Just a minute. Sorry about that. Is it sharing now? I don't know. I seem to, Barak. I seem to have an issue with
Barak, are you there? You help
Can you see, and can you see the green screen at the bottom? That's
yes.
Yes. When I click,
just click on.
It does not share. That is.
No, once you click on it, you have
just a minute. I
then
do
click
that
on the slide.
Just that.
So the green share screen, then followed by clicking on the slide that you want to share.
You have to have the document open.
Yes, the document is open. You can see it now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I will be taking you through the 5G myths, realities, and opportunities, looking at the regulatory perspective. I think my colleagues have basically covered almost all of it. So I'll just be doing a summary. So the structure of my presentation, I'll go through an introduction, the role of the Communications Authority of Kenya in the development of 5G, the World Radio Communication Conference 2019 decisions on 5G, the current status on 5G, and finally, I will do a conclusion. So just for an introduction, for those who are not aware about the Communications Authority of Kenya, we are the ICT regulator in Kenya, and our responsibilities are in the telecommunications industry, cybersecurity, e-commerce, broadcasting, and postal and courier services. We are also responsible for managing the country's numbering and frequency spectrum resources. And we also administer the USF fund, and we also safeguard interests of users in the ICT industry. So our role in the 5G narrative is mainly in the management of the frequency spectrum resources. Just as Daniel Obam has talked about earlier, he's talked about the 5G frequencies and the process that the World Radio Conference goes through to get these frequencies. So for an introduction, if you're introducing a new technology, 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, all the way to 5G, that requires the use of frequencies, how do we go about this? So the studies mainly start at the International Telecommunications Union level. And then from there, we have agendas that are set on what to discuss. So for example, if you're talking about 5G, what are we going to study in terms of 5G? What frequency bands will we consider? Under these frequency bands, what other, like the deployment scenarios, what are we looking at? So this starts at the International Telecommunications Union level. And where do we come in as Kenya, in this case, the Communications Authority of Kenya? So where we come in as Kenya is that we come together to put up our positions on what we think our decisions should be based on the technology. So in this case, in terms of 5G, we look at which frequency bands do we feel and are okay for 5G for Kenya. And when we do this, we are in consultation with our neighbors, because you'll realize that with frequency management, when you do harmonization, this leads to economies of scale, even in terms of equipment manufacturing. So we are trying to come up with decisions that are going to incorporate what maybe the East Africa community will do, and also what the African region will do. So these studies will now be taken into account under the East Africa Community and under the African Telecommunications Union. Then when we have our positions, these are the positions that we go with to the International Telecommunications Union and make up a decision of what bands now will be taken into account. So on our role in the development of 5G. So the agenda was set at the World Radio Conference 2015, where studies, as Obam earlier said, it was indicated that we would study the frequencies between 24.25 gigahertz to 86 gigahertz. And other aspects of these studies included looking at reviewing the technical and operating characteristics. So in these cases, we are looking at, is 5G able to operate in these frequency bands? Are we able to get the throughputs that we need when we are using these frequencies? And then you'll realize that there are also other services that are already operating in these bands. So when we introduce the 5G services, are they able to be compatible with the services in these bands? We're also looking at the deployment scenarios. I think you had Adam talk about the use case scenarios. When we are looking at machine type communication, when we are looking at solutions that can be taken for the agricultural sector. So what deployment scenarios are we looking at? And we're also looking at the timeframes in which this spectrum would be needed. For example, if it's frequencies that are already available, how will we assign it to be used for 5G services? And if there are frequencies that are maybe in use by other services, are we planning to migrate these bands? And as Obam talked about, you remember the migration to digital broadcasting. So within what time frames are we going to look at to migrate these services? So for more details on these studies, I have attached the link to the ITU website. So as CA, we participated in these studies for 5G and we developed our positions. And this was not done only by CA. This usually happens through a national preparatory committee where we have other relevant stakeholders. So we'll have, for example, the telecommunications operators, the broadcasters, government agencies, because we are looking at a decision that is wholesome, that takes into account all the users of spectrum and also looking at what is in the best interest of the country. So we did this during the cycle of 2015 to 2019. And again, we went through the process of harmonization of these positions within the East Africa region and also within the African region. And with these positions, this was presented to the World Radio Conference 2019. And I think the outcomes of which Mr. Obam has talked about. So there were frequencies that were identified globally for 5G and others that were identified on a regional basis. So the ones that were identified globally, again, he talked about this was 26, 40, and 66 to 71 gigahertz band. So what's the advantage of having globally harmonized frequencies? You'll find that this will ensure that we have system interoperability and global roaming. So we are talking about when you move with your device around the world, are you able to use the same device or do you have to go and buy another device? And also I talked about benefits from economies of scale. So when you have globally harmonized frequency bands, it means the manufacturers are manufacturing equipment on chipsets that are on the same frequency bands, which makes it even more affordable for the users. And I think this was talked about, what these additional frequencies will facilitate. We'll have enhanced mobile broadband, we have machine type communication, we have low latency communication. And I think this was covered earlier, so I think I will just move on. So what are we doing as the authority now after the WRC 2019? So the World Radio Conference 2019 was held in November and the frequencies were released for use for 5G. So at the authority right now, what we are working on is mechanisms of how those frequencies will be released to the industry. So we are looking at licensing methodologies. For example, if there are frequencies that will be used in the factories, do we need to license more players or will we go for maybe license-free methodology? So that is what we are looking at right now. And again, you heard that for 5G, some cases may require amount of bandwidth to be a bit high. Some may require moderate. So what amount of bandwidth are we going to offer to the operators? We're also looking at the frequency spectrum pricing mechanisms. So for 5G, how are we going to price this spectrum to ensure that eventually the users get affordable services? And other things that we're looking at would be like the type approval of devices. What devices are coming into Kenya? Are they good for the market? Have they been tested and certified. So in conclusion, what are we saying as the authority? We will continue to participate in future 5G studies. And as Obam indicated earlier, you'll find that most of the frequencies that are being preferred for 5G are in the sub 6 gigahertz band. So how are we going to allocate these frequencies? Are we going to do refarming? Are we going to look at moving some of the services? So this is what we are continuing to do. And again, we are looking at the discussions on those other proposed bands. How are we going to ensure that they're available for 5G, or what other services can they be used for? And finally, I think we will continue to work with relevant stakeholders to develop 5G strategies that are beneficial to Kenya. So we are looking at what use cases will benefit Kenya. And as Adam earlier said, maybe driverless cars are not for us. So what use cases will be beneficial to Kenya? So that's my conclusion. And I think we'll take questions later.
And thank you very much for that. As moderator today, it looks like I'm struggling a little bit with connectivity and power. So I'm hoping that 5G will sort out some of our issues. I'm hoping that everybody can hear me. So there are so many questions, and there are some quite interesting ones that are actually currently being asked. Some of my panelists are already answering some of those questions. But I'm trying to also see some of those questions and ask my panelists to answer them. Panelists, are you able to see all the questions?
Yes, there's so many. Wow.
I think Walu, as I said, I'm struggling a little bit with my connectivity. Walu, would you like to pick two of them? And I would request maybe Adam is already answering some of those questions on the chat. I think, guys, you will actually appreciate that we may not be able to answer all those questions. We have a few minutes left. So, Walu, you want to pick two of the questions that
yes,
I'll see you?
I can deal with.
Pick them.
Yeah, let me.
Yeah, please. And then I will go to Dan. I will go to Engineer Obam.
Okay, I'll speak to Wamuyu Mwangi. Wamuyu is asking, since our current infrastructure does not support 5G, what costs are related in rolling this out? Who will meet these costs? And given that it's estimated that only 14% of the subscribers will be on 5G, is it really worth the effort? It's a good question. The current telco providers will meet the cost of rolling out 5G. There's always concern that it's the government that meets the cost. The government's role here is on the regulation. They will provide the regulatory frameworks that encourage the telco sector to move up the value chain, which in this case is 5G. And it's the private sector to scratch their heads and figure out where to get the money and do the rollout, with the intention, of course, being that they will recoup or they will get their returns from the emerging new services that will come on top of the 5G. So keep in mind, taxpayers are only going to fund the salaries of the regulator in the whole scheme of things, and it's up to the telco providers to look for private investors to roll out 5G. I think I could pick one more. Tom Mutoka says,
please, Walu.
what does what does Huawei's 5G deployment mean for wireline technology? Interesting interesting. Well, one thing is to say that 5G is not purely for Huawei. It's a technology that can be deployed by any of the technology providers. However, the question is about whether 5G, given its speeds, will replace fiber. I do not think it will, because the dynamics, both at technical as well as business point of view, wireline and GSM technologies have different business models, and they also have different, market types. I would probably want to say that fiber, which is based on light signals, has unlimited bandwidth. 5G, which is also some form of electromagnetic, is part of the spectrum, but the way it's designed, eventually it will reach saturation in terms of what is the number of devices that can talk to the access network, to the radio network. But on the fiber, you'll find that fiber will always have its place, because at the backhaul to the telco network switching center, or from Mombasa to the rest of the world, the place for fiber can never be taken up by the radio technologies. I think those two will be enough for me. Maybe the other panelists could chip in.
Walu, thank you very much. Before we go back to the questions, I would like to introduce Dr. Bello Musa. Dr. Musa struggled a bit to get onto the network, but he's now here. Dr. Musa is Director of Innovation at He's Director of Innovation and Strategy at Huawei, Southern Africa. Dr. Musa, please take the floor and spend a few minutes to just talk to us a bit. Over to you, Dr. Musa.
Oh, yes. Very good afternoon, Barak, and all the participants. All my apologies, I couldn't join earlier, but my colleague Adam has made the presentations, which I believe the participants have got a good grasp of the content. So I would just wanted to add on the or bring some comments on the 5G uptakes in Africa. Well, currently we have a few live networks in South Africa and many trials around countries. Operators are really eager to deploy this. One, for business, and for branding. Everyone wants to be the first, to be called the first to have deployed 5G in this country. And also now with this emergency COVID, we have seen governments who are also trying to see how they will quickly deploy 5G network for certain applications, like in the medical, especially in the medical field. I also like to add something on the questions about the Huawei's 5G. So currently, Huawei has participated in around 100 5G network deployment around the world, in which many of them are live. But the interesting point here is, as the previous speaker has mentioned it, what we are doing in Huawei, mainly here in Southern Africa, is to really work together with the industry to see what could be the real use cases for 5G in Africa, because 5G will be a complete different network to the previous technology. It's going to be on use case basics. So A 5G deployed for medical services or agricultural services may not be the same as a 5G deployed for fixed wireless access, for instance. So all these elements will help us model the 5G network architecture, which will be suitable for Africa. Yep, so that's what I wanted to add. Thank you very much, moderator.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bello Musa. Let me pick a few questions for some of our panelists. Question from William Mazenge. This will go to Ms. Anne Kinyanjui. And the question is, what are the regulatory issues surrounding enrollment of 5G, considering its effect on data mobility and enforcing a data subject right? Anne, have you taken that?
Yes, I've taken that. You want me to answer now?
Okay. No, I'll come back to you in a few.
Okay.
The next question is to Adam from Mwenda Njiraini. Adam, Huawei mentioned that a potential use case in Kenya is replacing existing security cameras to facial recognition cameras. Have privacy considerations been taken? Adam, that question goes to you. Let's go back to Anne. Anne, please answer that question from William, and then I'll come back to Adam or Dr. Bello. Anne, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ali. So my response to that would be that I remember, if you remember in my presentation, I mentioned that we are looking at the licensing methodologies. So one of the reasons why we make sure that we license operators is so that we give them terms and conditions on which they would operate. So once we're able to license the operators, then those operators, we would, if it's issues to do with data privacy, then those would be incorporated into the license so that we make sure that as you're providing the 5G services, then you're operating within your license terms, which include ensuring that you provide data privacy to your consumers.
Over to you, Adam.
Okay, on the question about the cameras, so 5G will just be replacing the fiber as the way of getting the footage from the camera back to whoever wants to view the footage, whether it's on a mobile phone or in a police station or a control center or something. It wouldn't have any different implications on privacy, whether you're using fiber to connect those base stations or 5G, only that actually, ironically, 5G can be more secure than fiber, in that fiber can be cut. I actually know that when somebody came to my house and broke in, they actually cut the cable to the security camera, whereas they would not be able to cut the cable to 5G because it would be within the actual casing itself. They could maybe cut the power cable, but if you have a battery, that would also resolve that problem too.
Thank you, Adam. I want to pick two more questions before we close the day. And what I would also advise, if your question hasn't been answered, we will put a link to our mailing list, and you could move that conversation further there. There's always very vibrant discussions going on our KIPSANET mailing list. But before I also go to the next two questions, let me not forget to thank the Huawei team for generously making this webinar happen today. There are two questions. Question one is a general question, but possibly Huawei would have this question. This is from Bob Ochieng. Bob asked, what is the current situation in terms of deployment of 5G across Africa? And the next question will go to the techies in the panel. Has the technical working groups factored in the electronic waste posed by the fact 5G devices will have backward compatibility, but not the same for 5G, for 4G to 5G? How will we manage this one once we transition to 5G 100%? That is from Moses Nawe. I admit that one passed me, across. So I would leave Walu and possibly Dr. Bello or Engineer Obam to take it. But I think the first one will probably go to either Dr. Bello or Adam on the situation across Africa when it comes to 5G deployment. Over to you, Adam.
Okay.
Adam or Dr. Bello, which one?
Yes, sure. Yes, Musa here. So currently in Africa, we've got a full-fledged 5G network, commercial 5G network deployed in South Africa by an operator called RAN. We also do have one in Lesotho, which is also commercial. And we have a lot of trials going on now. What I want to mention here, the main problem for 5G deployment or uptake in Africa for now is mainly resided on the level of the spectrums. As the regulator have mentioned, currently not so many countries have already allocated spectrum for 5G deployment. So I'm sure once that problem is solved, we will see so many deployments here in Africa, because of course of the advantages that the technology is bringing. Yeah.
Thank you, Musa. Next question. Walu, would you want to go for that one, or
Sorry, maybe Engineer. I was busy answering on the Q&A. So I didn't
great.
ask the question you wanted me to do.
Is the engineer still here? Engineer Obam? I think he's not here.
What was the question? Just, sorry, remind me. I could take it.
All right, so let me just repeat that question from Moses. Has the technical working groups factored in the electronic waste posed by the fact 5G devices will have backward compatibility, but not the same for 4G to 5G? How will we manage this once we transition to 5G 100%?
Okay, well, e-waste is a big problem, not just for 5G devices, but all electronic devices, including TV, iron boxes, computers, etc. I recall when we went into 3G, e-waste was a big agenda. And I think the regulator was pushing to have sort of a facility for all the players to dump their e-waste there, but then the whole story just died like that. So I'm not in a position to say how far we are on that. Probably the regulator could be in a better position, but it's a key thing. How are we handling e-waste in general, not just specific to 5G? Thank you.
Thank you, Walu. I think I will take one last question, and this is more from a regulatory perspective. And I'm not sure we sort of have the answer today, but I will try and also help Anne Kinyanjui on this one. Anne, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so Anne, this question is from Edith Jeru.
Mhm.
On electronic and autonomous vehicles, who is supposed to come up with a policy, because those will also use the spectrum for LIDAR and GPS in brackets for the V2E communication. So, and before you answer, maybe I think participants would probably want to appreciate that some of these questions would transcend the communication authority. You would need to sort of have an inter-policy, interministerial conversation around this, because when you come to autonomous vehicles, you also have the transport ministry, you also have the ICT ministry. So you can answer to the best of your of your ability, Anne, but I would also ask Edith if she's not on the list, rather on the KICTANet list, she can join the KICTANet list, and you will be able to continue this conversation. And for those of you who may not know where to join the list, you can just go onto kictanet.or.ke. You'll have all the information there. And over to you.
Thanks again, Ali. I think you have partly answered the question, because this would actually involve a multi-stakeholder sort of like committee or discussion, because as the authority, our main point would be to come in and advise on the spectrum issues. But now again, the transport people would have an aspect in it. And we're looking at if it's spectrum that has already been allocated to other services. For example, what Edith is saying for GPS, what would normally happen is studies would be carried out to see whether the two services can interoperate within the same frequency band. If this can happen, then the conditions would be set for that. Then if this would not happen, then the earlier service that was there would be considered, or you would be looking at other issues of maybe what I had mentioned earlier. Can you migrate some services to accommodate others? But now this again would have, the policy would have to be in consultation with other stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Anne, for that. I see we have 5 more minutes left, so I will be look at maybe, yes, Edwin Ombega. Edwin has asked the question, 5G is cloud native. Does this add to its performance compared to a similar architecture with fiber? Adam, would you like to take that? You want me to repeat the question?
Yeah, I heard it. What I can say is that generally a lot of networks now are being developed and managed and controlled through the cloud. So it means that you can change functions, upgrade functions without physically having to go to an actual site. And 5G is certainly designed to do that. An interesting aspect of 5G we've not mentioned yet that's relevant to this aspect of the cloud is something called network slicing. So you can allocate bits of a network for different purposes. So you could say this is going to be, say, for the electricity in smart meters. You could say this is going to be using it for the driverless cars, and this could be for the home users, and this could be, say, the individual smartphone users. In that way, they wouldn't actually affect each other. So even if there's millions of smart cars using up their bit of the spectrum or their bit of the 5G network, it would be on a different network slice. It wouldn't affect those who are using it for their home use or personal use. So that's an interesting function that you can obviously manage remotely using the cloud, which is something that's quite helpful. I think that's probably a good enough answer for the moment.
Thank you, Adam. There's an interesting question here that hasn't been answered. This is I think back to you. Can the Communications Authority do independent studies on the bioeffects of the 5G above 6 gigahertz on living things, plants, and animals? EMF, radiation, effects on always on connectivity. Anne, would you like to take that?
Okay, I think my comment on that would be the authority would partner with maybe the relevant institutions to see how such studies can be carried out. So that is not something I think I would give an official position on, but maybe in our discussions, interactions of seeing that it is actually coming up, it would be something that we would propose for studies to be done.
And thank you very much for that. Now participants, we come to the end of this webinar. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who took the time to join us today afternoon. I want to particularly thank our panelists, John Walubengo, lecturer at Multimedia University, Dr. Bello Musa, Innovation and Strategy Director at Huawei Southern Africa, Adam Lane, Deputy CEO for Huawei East Africa, Anne Kinyanjui, Acting Manager, Frequency Planning Communications Authority, and Daniel Obam, Spectrum expert, and also head at the National Communications Secretariat. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Barak Otieno, who is a member of ClickTernet, who is the man who is actually made this happen in the background. Barak, thank you very much. I would like to also take this opportunity to thank all the members of the ClickTernet Secretariat for making this happen. Last but not least, vote of thanks to the team at Huawei, Adam, Dr. Bello, and your teams for making this happen. Thank you very much once again, and we look forward to another webinar at some point in the near future. Thank you all, and have a good evening.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye. See ya.